What do you want to be when you grow up? What's your next job? What are you shooting for? Are you hoping to get a promotion? Do you want to run your own business? Do you ever feel exhausted by questions like this? Do you ever feel like it's enough to just get through the day? We're about to have a conversation with the editor of Entrepreneur Magazine, and I think this dude is going to change the way you think.
We always have an odd one in the crowd.
So it's kind of odd.
Decidedly odd.
Doesn't that strike you as a little bit odd?
No, that doesn't strike me as a little bit odd.
It's the Bob and Sheri Oddcast, with stuff we wouldn't, couldn't, or shouldn't do on the regular show. Now, here's the Oddcast.
Whole bunch of us grew up in a world watching TV shows and movies that kind of hinted that you would grow up and get a job and you'd work at that job for a long time and you'd climb the ladder and then you'd retire with a little party and the proverbial gold watch and a pension, and that would be your working life. And then we turned into grown-ups and arrived at our working life and discovered that that is as extinct as the dinosaurs, and that the only thing that's really going to be a constant in your career is all of the churn and change that goes with working now. So joining us is Jason Feifer. And I don't know, Jason, I'm Gen X, so I kind of came of age in a world where things were already starting to shift away from that idea, that the company would take care of you. And now it seems, especially in the industry I'm in, that you had better take care of yourself.
Oh, yeah, you better. And I would go further, which is that you should always be thinking about how the thing you're doing right now will change. Just imagine how you would function differently if you were what I call building for tomorrow. I have a book called Building for Tomorrow, but where you were thinking about how you use today to set yourself up for tomorrow rather than using today to just maximize today. It changes the way that you think about the decisions you make, and it changes the way you think about the future of your career.
Well, and the wisdom there is that this isn't just some like esoteric philosophy. You look at the pace of technology and the way it's changing, the way all of us live and work almost hourly. You can't afford to really get too comfortable or too complacent, because you'll wake up tomorrow to a brand new set of challenges and the learning curve. The idea that you went to school, you learned a career or whatever, some skills, and then you went out and applied them, that also doesn't hold, right? Because the learning curve, it's just as steep today as it was on day one, and it's ever evolving.
That's right. So here's something I think everyone should be doing all the time. Doesn't matter what stage of career you're at. It doesn't matter if you work at a company or if you own your own business. You should be doing what I call work your next job. It goes like this. In front of you, Sheri, in front of me, in front of all of us are two sets of opportunities right now. Two sets. Opportunity set A, opportunity set B. Opportunity set A is everything that is asked of you. So if you go to a job and you've got a boss and that boss expects things from you and your progress is evaluated on how well you do those things, well, that's opportunity set A. Do a good job at those things. Then there's opportunity set B. Opportunity set B is everything that is available to you that nobody is asking you to do. And once you start thinking of it like that, well, what is available to you that nobody's asking you to do? Could be a lot of things. Could be joining a new team or taking on some new responsibilities at work. Could be taking a class outside of work. It could be learning a new skill. It could be networking more. These are the things that are available to you that nobody's asking you to do. And I am here to tell you, big claim, hot take, I think that opportunity set B, doing the things that are available to you that no one's asking you to do, is always more important than doing the things that are asked of you. Always. Why? Well, I'm not saying that you should stop doing the things that are asked of you. If you show up at work, you got to do a good job because that's how you earn your paycheck. But if you only focus on the things that are asked of you, then you will only be qualified to do the things you're already doing. Growth happens in opportunity set B. This is how I've built my career. I remember, for example, when I worked at Fast Company, which is another business magazine, I was a print magazine editor and we started a video department. And nobody asked me to be on camera, but I asked me to be on camera. Why? Because I just figured that getting myself in front of a camera would somehow lead to good things. It would develop a new set of skills. And what were they? I didn't really know, but I got in front of that camera. I was pretty awkward. I was open to learning. I learned a lot. And as a result, I learned, for example, how to talk to you right now using this voice and feeling comfortable on a microphone. That was the thing I learned back then. But also, I never got a television show of my own. But years later, when I was interviewing to be editor-in-chief of Entrepreneur Magazine, one of the things they really liked about me was that I could go on camera and represent the brand. You can put me on TV and I'm comfortable doing that. I can stand on stage and I can tell a story. And that was all because of Opportunity Set B. I did a thing nobody asked me to do. It helped me build a skill, and that opened future doors that I couldn't even see at the time. We should all always be doing that. Think right now of 3 things that are available to you that no one's asking you to do, that are just intriguing, that might lead to something, even if you don't know what the return on investment of that is going to be. And now set aside some time to do that. One of those, I guarantee, is going to lead you in a direction that you will be so, so glad you went down.
We are talking to the editor of Entrepreneur Magazine, and he's got some wisdom for you, Jason Feifer. Let's talk a little bit about fear, because one of the things I hear the most from people that I work with is, they go, I hear what you're saying, but I'm really afraid I'll fail. I won't be able to do that. I'm afraid it'll take away from the stuff I'm getting paid for. It just comes down to fear, fear, fear.
Mm-hmm.
So is that fear? Is that like a speed bump that you can get past, or are there some people that are just stopped right there by that fear of, I won't be able to succeed, I'll fail, I'll look foolish, I'll lose my gig?
Well, look, that stuff might happen, but you don't know if that's going to be good or bad. You don't know if something that feels bad today is ultimately good or bad. I mean, if something bad happens to you, if you failed in some way today, and then your life ended tomorrow, well, then in the record books, that was a bad thing. But I'm sure all of us, I'm sure you, Sheri, can think of times in your life when something bad happened and then you reacted to it. And as a result, something good happened. Because here's the thing, life is not linear, life is reactive. When bad things happen to us, it doesn't necessarily mean that another bad thing is going to happen to us, that we're going to be in a spiral of badness. The very worst thing that has happened to me in my life was that I was sued for 5 years by someone who had infinite dollars. It was awful, right? Like anyone who has ever had to interact with the legal system knows it's just crushing. It was financially crushing. It was emotionally crushing. It consumed 5 years of my life. And it happened a couple months after my first son was born. So this was high pressure. And I could imagine a story, a linear story, where one bad thing leads to another bad thing, right? Where I get sued and the stress it means that I stop working, and it creates a financial hardship on my family. And then I get divorced, and then and on and on and on. But that's not how life is. Life is not linear. Life is reactive, like I said, which means that when something bad happens, you react to it. And that reaction can, in fact, lead to good things. In this case, I was sued. And at the time, I was a freelancer, and I was at a kind of pivoting moment in my career. And I was scared to be a freelancer with an unsteady source of income at the time. And at the time, one of the things that I was a freelancer for was Entrepreneur Magazine, where I was doing some freelance editing. And I decided to join the staff of Entrepreneur because I was afraid because of this lawsuit. 9 months later, the editor-in-chief of Entrepreneur Magazine left, and I made a play for that job, and I got it. And that job has absolutely transformed my life. Bad led to good. We don't know if something bad is ultimately bad or if it's good. Now we're just talking about outcome. You would ask me about fear. And let's not dismiss fear. Fear is very real. And if I tell you, just don't be afraid, that's not useful. You're not going to just not be afraid. So instead, let's think of it like this. There are 2 kinds of fear. There's the fear that leads you to hold on to things. And there's the fear of not figuring out what's next fast enough. This is something that I came to realize when I was the very last social event that I went to before COVID shut things down was a friend's birthday party. And I was sitting next to a woman named Megan Asha, who has a company called Founder Made. And Founder Made is a live events company for consumer packaged goods brands. So people who make like, chips and sodas and stuff. And I'd been to some of her events. They're really wonderful. And I said to her, Megan, what are you going to do? Live events seem to be shutting down. Aren't you afraid? And she said, you know what? I'm actually not afraid. I'm excited. And the reason is because we've had all these ideas of other things that we could do with our business, other lines of revenue, and we've never been able to explore them because all of our energy goes into the live business. So now, if live business shuts down, well, now we have an opportunity to explore these things that we haven't, and we start to think about things that could grow our business. And that's scary, but it's also exciting. And at the time, I thought, well, this is a person who lives without fear. This is incredible. But I came to realize that what Megan was really doing was she was operating off of the better fear. She didn't have a fear of losing things. That is a fear that forces you to hold on to whatever you already have, like standing on a shrinking iceberg. She instead had a fear of not figuring out what's coming next. She understood that the future was going to be full of opportunity and change. She didn't know exactly what the opportunities for her would be, and she was afraid of not finding them fast enough. That's a fear that propels you forwards instead of a fear that holds you back.
This really resonates with me and with us because, we were a business that also had to dramatically pivot during COVID. And a lot of my peers just kind of left. They were like, you know what? It's too much. I don't know how to do this any other way, but in that traditional corporate radio model. And we were like, you know what? We're going to figure this out. And for me, fear gives me perspective. I've always felt very lucky that I had an incredibly chaotic and violent early life, because by the time I hit my 20th birthday, I was like, oh, what else are you going to throw my way? And working in corporate America was like, yeah, you guys are kind of dicks, but I've survived my meth cook daddy, so I'm probably going to be okay with y'all. This is just Tuesday. And I think that having that knowledge, sometimes, and I see this happen a lot with people in business settings, because it is existential, right? This paycheck is how I'm keeping my kids fed and all that. I get it. I'm right there with you. But I see people forget their own vast wealth of life experience. Like here comes the moment when it's all going to hit the fan, and I watch people crumble, and I'm like, how are you crumbling? My God, do you know who you are? Have you met yourself? How is this the thing that's going to take you down? I think it's so important to maintain some perspective and to know that one of the tools you have in your kit is your own life experience and resiliency. If you can be resilient outside of your job, and career, you can be resilient inside your job and career.
Yes. Here's an exercise everyone should go through right now. Come up with a personal mission statement for yourself. And here's why. And I'll explain what that means in a second. But Sheri, what you just said is perfect and beautiful, and we're going to build upon it right now. What we tend to do, the mistake that we tend to make, is that we outsource our identity. If someone comes up to you at a party and says, what do you do? The answer that you often give them is some version of the tasks that you perform or the role that you occupy, which is to say the thing you might do at work or the role you hold there. And that's fine, but the problem is that those things are changeable, super, super changeable. And if your identity is tied to those things, then as soon as they change, and they will change, then that doesn't just feel like a change to your work, it feels like a change to your identity. And that's scary, and that feels like loss, and that feels like panic. So instead, what we need to do is we need to identify the thing about us that does not change in times of change. Exactly what you were just saying there. And how do we do that? Well, one way that I found to be really useful is to come up with a personal mission statement. Here's what it sounds like. You want to come up with a single sentence, and it starts with I. That's the first word. And then after that, every word is carefully selected because it is not anchored to something that's easily changeable. So what does that sound like? Well, I could say I am a magazine editor because that's a job that I hold. I am a magazine editor. And if people come up to me at a party and say, what do you do? It's often what I say. I'm a magazine editor. But here's the thing, Sheri, as you and I talk right now, it is possible, hopefully not likely, but it's possible that my boss at Entrepreneur, it's not my company, I don't own it, I'm just an employee. My boss's name is Bill. Bill could call me on my phone. I'm holding my cell phone right now as we're talking. He has the number. He could call and he could fire me. He could. There's nothing stopping him from doing that. And if my identity is I'm a magazine editor, well, then I'm one phone call away from losing my identity. And that's a terrible, scary place to be. So what's a better personal mission statement? How's this? Like I said, short sentence, starts with I. After that, every word carefully selected because it is not anchored to something that's easily changeable. Here's a personal mission statement for myself. I tell stories in my own voice. I tell stories, such a careful word there. Not magazine stories, that can be taken away from me. Not newspaper stories. I used to work in newspapers. Not podcasts. I have a podcast, but who knows? Maybe people stop listening to it and it doesn't make sense to make it anymore. But I tell stories. You can't take that away from me. I do that in every possible way. I've done it already here with you on this show. I get hired to speak to companies and I basically tell them stories about how they can succeed. And then in my own voice is me setting the terms for how I want to operate at this stage of my career. I have traveled around, and Sheri, if you have an answer to this for yourself, I'd love to hear it. I have traveled around to hundreds of companies and organizations, and I've shared this exercise with them. And I hear incredible things. I hear people say, I help teams achieve greatness. I solve the most complex problems. There was a woman who was a consultant. She had built a consultancy and then she put it on hold to be a stay-at-home mom. She told me that she had really struggled with that identity shift because even though she loves being at home with her child, she doesn't identify with the term stay-at-home mom. She identified with her work that she had just put on hold and she didn't know what to do about that. And then she told me that the personal mission statement helped clarify it because the phrase that she came up with was, I help people become the best versions of themselves. And that applied both to raising a child and to the work she did as a consultant. And she realized that the things that mattered most in her life had a continuity to them and that she was never starting at zero. And that's why this is so important.
I guess mine would be similar to yours. It would sound something like this. I tell people stories that start off sounding like they're about the world, but end up being about you.
That's great. That's great.
And I do that on radio, podcast, books. That really has been my whole career. And one of the things that this is making me think about, and I would love your thoughts on this, Jason, I see a lot of discourse on social media about how, Gen Z workers are like, sorry, I'm not going to be giving you my whole entire life and spending nights and weekends answering email. Like Gen Z workers have pretty clear boundaries and they are a different animal as they enter the workforce. They are not the, let me give the company everything I have till I die at the job boomers. They're not the, oh my God, I'm afraid I'll starve to death Gen Xers. They're not the millennials who were like, well, shit, nothing's gone our way, not even one time. But Zoomers have grown up in a world watching the covenant be broken. The worker, the employer-employee covenant be broken. Gen Z knows that we're not a family. I'm your employee. We don't work hard and we play hard. We work, and then when we're no longer of value to you, we're expendable. Gen Z sees that clearly, much more clearly, I think, than the preceding generations. And I think that Gen Z comes by this idea of identifying who they are outside of what they do very organically and naturally. What do you think?
I love your description there. You did something in describing generational shifts that most people forget. Most people treat generations and the traits associated with those generations, which, let's be clear, are always just generalizations, but treat those generations as if they are independent actors that just came up with a new set of demands for the world.
Yeah.
But that's not it. Generations are shaped by the world that they come up in. And their expectations are driven by the opportunities that they see. And this generation came up exactly as you said, in a time of total instability, where it's very unlikely that they will be taken in by one company and they will be supported throughout their career. I mean, whether or not that's something that you want or not, it's just not what's likely going to happen. What instead is likely going to happen is that your success is going to be driven by your own ability to be adaptable and to protect and support yourself. And so, of course, this generation is going to be interested in boundaries. And of course, this generation is going to want to figure out what's in it for them, because nobody around them cares about that except them. So I love that they think that way. And
I think we talk about the difference between analog natives and digital natives. I look at Gen Z and Gen Alpha, and I think these are entrepreneurial natives because they don't know any other world.
Yes. I've seen in the world of entrepreneurship, I have seen major spikes. Here's last two major spikes in entrepreneurship: Great Recession of like the 2008, 2009, COVID. I mean, coming out of COVID, a more than decade high spike in new business applications in America. Decade high spike. And that's because you had all these people who got laid off or who were worried about getting laid off, who said, wait a second, the only person who's going to take care of me is me. And they had an idea. And look, it's also never been easier to start a business, which is not to say that it's easy to start a business. Let me be clear. It's not, and it's not a path for everybody, but there are tools today that just didn't exist before. You don't have to take care of your own supply management. You don't have to ship everything yourself now. You can find you have tools that'll write your marketing copy for you. You have the Fiverr, where you can find a cheap designer to make a logo. I mean, it's just, you don't have to do the kinds of things and invest in the kinds of ways that you did 20 years ago. And a lot of people are throwing themselves into that. And I find that very compelling. It's funny. I hear from young entrepreneurs all the time. I once got an email from a 14-year-old asking me for advice on what to do about all the poser entrepreneurs at her high school, because she's a real entrepreneur. And it's like, I love that. It's like so crazy, but that just shows you how deep this culture has been ingrained. And I think that's great.
It's empowering in the same degree that it's kind of terrifying, because what we're really talking about here is responsibility and accountability, and not this idea that Big Daddy is going to carry me in his big, strong hands from, my first day at work till my last day as a working adult. This idea that you have to be responsible for yourself and your growth and your upward mobility, which loops us back to something you said right at the very beginning. Do the things that are available to you that are not required of you. Go ahead and pick up those extra skills. And I don't mean like offer to stay later and clean up after the pizza party. I mean, go ahead and learn, like in our business. To a lot of people, it seems like, well, we just talk, right? But nobody in this world has the luxury of only knowing how to talk. You have to be extremely adept with all sorts of digital technologies and skill sets, right? And the people that are thriving in my world and working are the people that figured that out early and made it their business to learn Photoshop, for example, Adobe editing, all of these things that are around you in the workplace, but they're not necessarily your job description. And we have a producer working with us, Carrie Bowser, we call him Doc. I watched him look around, very entrepreneurial, look around and go, well, this is the job they're paying me for, but these are the half dozen things that if I put those into my toolkit, I become super valuable and super multidimensional. Yes. And that understanding that if it's to be, it's up to me, I think is what you really see loud and proud in millennials and Gen Z in the workforce, because they don't know any other way. And instead of being critical of that, I think we should be celebrating that. I think that's the future.
We should be celebrating it. We should be emulating it. I mean, a couple of really important things that you just said there. So number one, when you're talking about Doc, you're talking about leverage. You're talking about becoming so valuable that you have more leverage in any relationship and negotiation. At every job, the more valuable you are, the more freedom and flexibility you have. And so it's great to be building those skills. It's great to be finding new opportunities outside. I mean, you know what I do? I mean, I push myself to the limit here. It's probably actually a little foolish, but in addition to having this job at Entrepreneur, and by the way, I scrapped my way up here. My first job out of college was earning $20,000 a year as a local community newspaper reporter in Massachusetts. I took a lot of risks. I quit a lot of jobs. I lived next to a cemetery in a dumpy apartment for $500 in central Massachusetts. Like I didn't just show up one day at a national magazine. But you know how I did that? The way I did that was that I constantly did two things at once. I did whatever job I was doing, and then I did that other thing, opportunity set B. I would freelance on the side. I would learn a new skill. I would do some consulting. I did teaching. I just tried to make myself as valuable as possible, because here's the thing. Once I also was able to figure out how to make money outside of work, I became less afraid of what happens at work. So many people operate out of fear because their future is in someone else's hands. If you are entirely dependent upon the job that you have, then you're afraid of doing anything that rocks that boat. And also you're at the mercy of someone else's decision making. But even if you have a job, but then also make some money on the side, I do it now. I'm an entrepreneur. I travel around, I speak, I write books, I make podcasts, I do all the stuff that makes me additional income. And that means that I'm less afraid of the ups and downs of what's happening at Entrepreneur. It's not to say that I don't care about it. I care about it, but it's not what keeps me up at night anymore. Leverage. You build leverage for yourself. And then the other thing, Sheri, that you said that I really wanted to double click on was you were talking about what you have done throughout your career and how you have to understand the role that you really play. Everyone should be asking themselves, what business am I really in? And then go 3 layers deep on that answer. Sheri, you're not in and you know this well, even I can tell in the answers that you've given me, you're not in the radio business and you're not in the audience business. I'm sorry, you're not in the radio business and you're not in the audio business. You're in the connection business. That's what the business you're in. Your power is in connecting with people. And so it doesn't really matter if it happens in radio or if it happens in podcasts or whatever. You just have to figure out where it can happen and how it can matter. And I think the same thing for myself. I'm not in the magazine business. I'm in the storytelling business, and I help people understand things through stories. The more in which you can define your value at an elemental level, the more, number one, you recognize how important it is for you to be developing new skills, because maybe they don't fit your tasks right now, but they fit your underlining value. But then number two is you create more value for yourself and more leverage so that you can get the better jobs and more money. And that is exactly what this generation is thinking and doing.
Well, the thing too, because I will say, for the longest time, Jason, I was like, oh, I don't want to have my own business. Oh my God, anything but that. Yeah, because it is exhausting, and it's a 24/7 hustle. And the people that had done it, that I watched and admired, I thought, well, I think they have something that I don't have. And what they had that I didn't have was no roadblock in front of them that was themselves saying, well, you don't have that. Right. Mm-hmm. And so, I took the leap and here we are, right? August 1st, 2017. And here we are, and we're still going. But I think that what I had, even as a corporate employee, I had an entrepreneurial mindset. And the people that work with us now who came from the corporate world, they're here because they had that same entrepreneurial mindset, that idea that I'm not just here collecting a paycheck. I'm here building something for myself.
Yeah.
On your dime. Like while you're buying the toilet paper and paying for the electricity, I'm building my own, like, fill in your name, incorporate it. And I think that entrepreneurial mindset is the salvation for a lot of folks now who are working for someone else and are in the corporate world, because that is the thing that instead of lying awake at night, to your point, and stressing about is tomorrow layoff day, when you have that entrepreneurial mindset, it becomes over time second nature to be thinking to the next move on the board and to be thinking ahead and to be seeing things through a clearer lens than fear and panic.
Yes. And you don't have to become a business owner to have that kind of mindset. That's a really important thing for people to remember. Not everyone has to leave their job and start a business. Like you said, Sheri, you didn't want to do that. You did it, but you didn't want to. But I know plenty of people who don't want to do it and haven't and are happy. And neither of us are here to invalidate anybody's decision. But what you should be doing is you should be thinking like an entrepreneur, because just that flexible way of thinking, that identifying of a need for growing value, that is what is most important. I think that if you're in a position right now where you're worried or you're unhappy, something I found that is really useful, and I think about this a lot, is one of the things that is really challenging about like diagnosing the feeling of frustration or feeling trapped, if that's where you're feeling, is it's just so big. It's hard to break down. It's hard to figure out what to do except to just blow it all up or walk away. But you're not going to do that because you're afraid and because that's a giant change. And, again, we are talking about entrepreneurial mindset, but maybe you're like, I don't know. I don't have a business that I want to start. Well, okay. There's a very influential psychological theory from, I think, the 60s or 70s. It's called self-determination theory. I find it incredibly compelling. It argues that people need three things in order to be happy. Three things. And here they are. I remember them by ARC. ARC. It's my acronym for it. Autonomy. You need to feel like they're in control of their own decisions. Relatedness. They need to feel connected to other people. And competency. You need to feel that they're doing something that they're good at. ARC. Autonomy, relatedness, competency. Every time that I've been unhappy in a job, I can think, for example, I was at Fast Company years ago. I think I mentioned that. I actually wasn't really happy there. I didn't understand what leadership wanted. It was kind of a confusing time to be there. There was a lot of changes going on. I had a nice office and then they took it away from me. And then I was sitting out there with everybody else. And I spent hours on Twitter. And now I understand why. It was because I wasn't finding autonomy, relatedness, and competency at my job. So I was looking somewhere else to find it. And I found it on Twitter, of all places, right? Where I could say whatever I wanted and I could connect with other people. And I was good at Twitter. People liked the things I was tweeting. And, but that's not healthy. That wasn't good. There wasn't a long-term strategy. Ultimately, I needed to figure out, where can I find these three things? And that question, where do I find autonomy? Where do I find a connection to others? Where can I do things that I feel like I'm really good at those things? That leads to decisions. That leads to, I got to start this other project. I at that same time, me and my wife started working on a romantic comedy novel that we ultimately sold and then sold the TV rights to. It's called Mr. Nice Guy. I started working on some other projects. I found things that I was really excited about, things that drove the next phase of my career. So if you're feeling frustrated and you don't know exactly what it is to do, break down those categories. Or do you feel like you get autonomy at your work? If not, where else can you find that? Or can you do something at work that will develop more of a sense of autonomy? Run through the same thing with relatedness, connection to other people, and then competency. And that's going to really help you start to figure out what your next move should be and where you need to find those things to be happy. And a lot of that is going to come down to how much are you going to be willing to invest in yourself.
So let me ask you this, Jason, because I really like this ARC, this autonomy, relatedness, competency. In your experience, talking to the people you talk to, writing the kind of stories you write, where do people tend to get the most stuck? Or let me rephrase it. Where do people tend to feel the most stuck?
I think that people tend to feel the most stuck when the thing that they thought was most important is revealed to not be, or when the thing that they thought was supposed to work stops working, or when the thing that they thought was the only way to do something is no longer the way to do it. People go into things with a plan, and then as soon as that plan gets interrupted, they feel like they don't know what to do next. I'll give you an example of somebody who I talked to who was like this. So there's a woman, she's got a wig company in Baltimore, and I'll come up with her name. She had always run this company like a storefront, and a storefront. So people come in off the street and they shop for wigs, and then COVID, and then she could no longer keep this storefront open, and she didn't know what to do. She was trying to think, how do I operate this business? And the only thing that she could come up with was not some radical, crazy new idea. It was actually something that she was well aware of as a concept. She just always thought it was bad for her business. And that is that she could move to appointment only. She could move appointment only viewing for these wigs. And she thought, well, that's a terrible idea because, nobody wants friction. Nobody wants it to be harder to buy a wig. People should be able to come in whenever they please and shop. But now she has no other option. And so she moves to appointment only. And Sheri, the craziest thing happens. Number one, customers are happier. Number two, she is more profitable. Now, why? Why? That doesn't make sense. The reason was because this whole time she thought that she needed to operate this business like a storefront. She'd started it as a storefront. She thought that was the way to operate this business. And to run a storefront, here's what she had to do. She had to hire a person who would greet people who came in off the street to look at wigs. But as it turns out, you know who her best customers were? They actually weren't people who come in off the street to buy wigs. They were actually people who were shopping for very personal reasons, usually health or religious reasons. And those people were actually really uncomfortable exploring this very personal shopping choice while surrounded by a bunch of random people who were walking in off the street. Here, this woman had been operating this business the way that she thought it should be operating. But actually, what she came to learn when she had to make a change was that she was operating that business in a way that was a worse experience for her best customers and was primarily catering to people who didn't actually buy, people who walked in off the street and looked at wigs but didn't buy wigs. And then she made the change, and then she discovered that there was a better way to do something. I have come to call this reconsidering the impossible. I think that all of us at all times, we all have this list in our head of things that are good ideas and things that are bad ideas. And the good ideas fit our understanding of ourselves and our work and what we think is right. And the bad ideas are the things that conflict with that. And the crazy thing is, and we often discover this when we're forced into making a change, the crazy thing is that oftentimes a lot of the things that were on the bad ideas list are actually really, really good ideas. And we need a way to push ourselves to explore outside the boundaries that we've drawn for ourselves, because that's how you get unstuck.
This puts me in mind, Jason. I love this specific anecdote. I have not needed, or I don't wear wigs. I have a pumpkin-sized head and plenty of hair, thank goodness. But if I were in the market for that, I would want that to be the most personal and private of experiences. So that completely resonates with me. But you know what it puts me in mind of? The early days of e-commerce, where people were like, but how can you buy clothes from the internet? You haven't touched them, right? Like there were so many things that people were like, wait a minute, how can that be? And then here comes a company like Instacart. You mean you don't want to go pick out your own food? But there are a lot of reasons and a lot of really functional reasons why someone might need or want their groceries delivered. And so these kind of disruptive ideas, it's wild how in the beginning it seems like, well, that's crazy, that'll never work. And then you blink and it's just a fact of life and we're all doing it. And it's wonderful to hear such an individual micro example of that kind of playing out with this one business owner. So now she's thriving. Things are going great, right?
Yeah, now she's thriving. While you were talking, I looked it up. The company is called, so her name is Lena, and the company is called Lena's Wigs in Baltimore. So if anyone's looking for a wig in Baltimore, Lena's Wigs. Yes, that's right. No, she's thriving. In fact, it's so funny. She got to hire, another person. She'd gotten rid of the person who was greeting people in off the street. And now she's had to hire someone to keep up with all the demand. She has leaned very heavily into digital marketing, into digital fittings, which she didn't realize would ever be a thing. And it has absolutely transformed her business. You're totally, totally right. I mean, the example of why would anyone ever want to buy something, buy clothing online, that is something that we apply to ourselves all the time. Well, why would somebody want that from me? But maybe they do. Maybe they actually do. And a useful framework for evaluating these kinds of things when you feel kind of stuck is ask yourself what kind of problem you're actually looking at. Like what kind of problem do you actually have? Because it's often not the problem that you think of. So if you use the example of clothing in early days of e-commerce, right? Like what was the actual problem? Was it a desire problem, right? Like I like categorizing problems by giving them a single word, helps you really understand them. Was it a desire problem? People don't desire to buy clothing online? Because if so, well then if that's the real problem, there's no reason to try to sell clothing online. People don't want it. But maybe that's not it. Maybe it's not a desire problem. Maybe it's a trust problem. Maybe what you have is a trust problem, that people don't trust that the clothing is going to be good. So if that's the answer, if that's the problem, well, okay, how can I build trust? What could I do? Well, I guess I could offer to mail them the clothing and they can mail it back if they don't like it, right? Oh, okay. Well, now it's a lot easier for them to do it. Maybe that takes down the trust problem, right? And you can do this in your own work too. I remember a guy who he was like he was in the advertising industry, and he was entry level, and he was really frustrated that nobody was taking his ideas seriously. And he asked me, he's like, what do you think about me just executing my ideas without getting permission so that people can see them in action? Because that maybe then they'll take me seriously. And I said, well, okay, that's a possibly reckless idea. You're going to spend a lot of money and people are going to be upset with you. I think that you first have to understand what kind of problem you have. Do you have a problem? Do you have a trust problem? Do people not trust you and therefore they aren't interested in your ideas? Do you have a seniority problem where it's just harder as a junior person to get people who are higher above you to pay attention to you? And if so, well, there's a different solution to that. Maybe you partner with someone a little higher above you and you guys present it together. Or maybe you have a communication problem. Maybe the problem is actually that you're just not good at articulating your ideas. You have good ideas, but it's confusing when you talk about them. So is there a way that you could communicate them better? Until you start to test which problem you have, you don't actually know how to succeed. But let's not write off the possibility of success. Let's not say, well, this is just not going to work. You've got to test all the reasons why it doesn't work right now. And then once you do, you will find a way to make this thing work.
So because this is kind of related to that. And I definitely want to cover this in this conversation because I'd love to continue this in another episode. But yeah, I know from paying attention to the people who listen to our shows that many of them are at a crossroads for a lot of reasons. For some, they've gone as far as they feel like they can, and they know they need a change. For others, they're in an industry that is closing down, or they're in a geographical region where the jobs are leaving. The hospital is closing, for example.
Yeah.
And all they've known is this one role. And it's time to change. And it feels like you're standing on the edge of a cliff and the wind is blowing and you're terrified. Can you talk folks in that position through like some of the beginning strategies and steps to kind of get your arms around that big, scary unknown?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for asking that. Really, really valuable way of thinking about this conversation and how important it is to people who feel lost. Okay, here's the first thing. Let's acknowledge that if you're in that position, it's really hard. It's really hard.
Mm-hmm.
And all this stuff that Sheri and I have been talking about for the last 50 minutes, it's all true, but it also can make it sound easy. And I'm not here to say that it's easy. It's not. It's not. But you got to do something. The story doesn't end here. So we're going to figure out what that is. And the first thing that I would ask you to do is to spend some time thinking about and maybe even writing down what is your transferable value. You have it. You have it. I guarantee it. You might have spent your whole career doing one task in a hospital system, and that hospital system is closing down. And now you think, I don't have anything. You do. You just have to think of it differently. Okay, fine. Maybe you did that one task, but what are you really, really good at? Are you really good at organizing? Are you really good at communications? Are you really good at keeping a team together? Are you really good at navigating complex systems? Start to think about what these things are that are your transferable value, because you have it. I think people are often afraid that when one thing ends, it means they're starting from scratch, and they're not. They're not.
Oh, such a great point. Ooh, say that again for the rest of the people in the way nosebleed seats. Say that again, because that is so much the truth.
Yeah. When something ends, you may feel like you're starting from scratch, and you're not. You have things that other people need. You developed skills that are still useful. They're going to look different in the future. You're going to use them differently in the future, but you are not starting from zero. That, I think, is something that people are most afraid of, that everything that you just spent your entire career working on has disappeared, and it hasn't. It's not to say it's going to be easy, but I'm telling you that you're not empty-handed, and that is the first place to start. Now, it's a question of where do we go from here? Look, there are all sorts of ways that you can start to evaluate the opportunities in front of you. I realize that if you're in a geographic area with limited opportunity, then you may have to make some changes. You might be able to find remote work. You might have to move. I hope that you don't if that's not what you want to do, but we have to consider what are the changes that are going to be required. And it's almost worth creating a decision tree in which you focus in on one area of exploration and you say, okay, these are the things that I want to remain fixed. I want to do this kind of work, or I want to use this kind of skill. And these are the things that I'm happy to have as a variable. I'm willing to change industries. I'm willing to do whatever. And start to explore within those boundaries. One of the greatest challenges of these kinds of transitions is that everything feels up in the air, and therefore it's impossible to figure out a direction. It's just blinding light everywhere. So what you need to do is lock some things down. These are the things that I want to remain fixed. These are the things that I'm okay as variables. And then start to test that out. Okay, well, if I want to stay in this industry, but I'm willing to make these changes, then where are the opportunities? How can I explore those opportunities? If they don't work out, what about them didn't work out? Are there gaps that I have in training, for example? Are there things that I can do to develop some training so that I can fill those gaps and therefore get those opportunities? This is a methodical process, and it's entirely solvable. Again, not to say that it's easy. You're going to do things and it's going to be hard.
But it does take that big overwhelming what next, and you begin to chip it away into piles, right? This pile, that pile, the other. Yeah.
Yes. Every big problem is actually just a collection of small problems, right? Like, think of it like that. Every big problem is a collection of small problems. So how can you start to break it up into problems? The thing that gets people stuck is that things feel too big. And so we need to start to shrink it down. And you're going to need to run some trial and error on things. Everything is an experiment. Everything that you do is an experiment. Some of them are going to work out and some of them are not. And when the experiment doesn't work, when you try something and it doesn't work, that doesn't mean that you failed. It doesn't, because what is the point of an experiment, right? I mean, if we're talking in a scientific lab right now, what's the point of an experiment? It's not to succeed. That's not what an experiment is for. It's just to find out what happens. That's what an experiment is for. So you run the experiment. You say, for the next 3 months, I'm going to apply to these kinds of jobs. That's it. I'm just going to apply to these kinds of jobs. I'm going to see what happens. I'm going to see what kind of results I get. And then I'm going to take that data, because even if you feel like what you just ran, the experiment you just ran was a failure, failure leads to data. Failure creates data. You can learn from that data and you can build upon it. I'll do a little obnoxious name dropping here because I as a magazine editor, I get to talk to interesting people all the time. I was talking to Ryan Reynolds once, and he had made this transition from acting into all this business stuff. He had an advertising agency and a bunch of different businesses, and he didn't know what he was doing. And I'm not here to equate the challenges that we've been talking about to Ryan Reynolds' challenges, but I loved this thing that he said. I love this thing that he said. He said to me this. He said, what he learned is to be good at something, you have to be willing to be bad. To be good at something, you have to be willing to be bad. Because the thing is, when we try something new, we will largely fail, and then we will think, well, I'm not meant to do that. That must mean that I'm not good at it. But that's not it. Ryan's point is that the thing that separates people who succeed from people who don't is not whether or not they're good at something at the start. It's whether they're willing to tolerate being bad long enough to get to good. That's an important distinction.
That is a really interesting way of looking at it, because we've all known people that feel like, well, if I'm not instantly an expert, if I'm not instantly flawless, then I got to find something else. And I don't know where we drank that Kool-Aid, where in the culture we got that messaging. Maybe because we worship celebrities and athletes, and we worship them when they're at their peak. Like that's when they become superstars, at their peak. We didn't start worshiping them when they were dribbling the ball in the driveway, right? That's
right.
Or trying to figure out how to play the guitar. Like when we encounter these individuals that are just so outstanding and so singular in their field, they're peaking. And so we look at that, and that's the unrealistic measurement that we have, right? Well, if I'm not going to be Taylor Swift or Ryan Reynolds or Travis Kelce, you can tell I'm a member of Chiefs Kingdom and a Swiftie, because all the athletes I know are Travis Kelce. But like, if I'm not going to be the best there is, and I'm not the best there is right now, then I give up. And that's a thing that maybe we pick it up in childhood, when we do poorly on the t-ball team and think that's it for me and we never try again. I don't know. But I do think it's connected in some strange way to our worship of not just competency, but of mastery, and then holding ourselves to that incredibly unrealistic once-in-a-lifetime standard.
Yeah. That word mastery just reminded me of we had my oldest son when he was 1.5 or something. We had him evaluated for something. I can't remember what it was. And anyway, it was, so this professional comes over and she puts a bunch of tasks in front of him, like watches him. And one of the phrases that she used in her evaluation of him, which I really loved, was works towards mastery. The thing that she liked to see was that if he had a problem in front of him, he kind of kept at it until he solved it. And that really stuck in my head, because that's something we all should be doing. We don't have to be masters at everything, but to be willing to work towards mastery is to give ourselves a fighting chance. And that's all we really should be promising ourselves. But we have to promise ourselves that.
Well, I want to make sure that everyone who's listening right now, there's a lot here. And it's hitting you at a time when you need this, because we're in a period right now of real flux. And I'm seeing so many people losing jobs, changing jobs, terrified that tomorrow they're going to wake up and find out they're on the hit list, and just feeling like the weight of the world crushing down on them. Y'all need to be reading Jason's newsletter, and you can find that at onethingbetter.email, which good for you on finding the easiest possible URL. onethingbetter.email, and we'll put the links and stuff in the show notes, because sometimes you're so in your own head and in your own feelings and in that echo chamber of doubt and criticism, right? That you need somebody to come and rattle those bars and show you, okay, here's some steps, right? Here's some things you can do to break out of that. Like, it's a running joke on our show, Jason, that our director, Max, if any person treated him the way the voice in his head does, like, it would be completely unacceptable. But when you're going through it, when you're in that struggle, that's the voice that's loudest. That's the voice you're listening to. And you do need somebody to come in and break that and disrupt that. And I strongly encourage you to subscribe and read onethingbetter.email. Jason Feifer, you are delightful. And I'm so appreciative of all the time that you gave us today on the Oddcast.
Hey, Sheri, thank you. This is such a great, look, like I said earlier in the conversation, you're in the connection business, and spend an hour talking to you, and it's very clear why. This is really wonderful. I'll say, by the way, for people who are thinking about marketing or reaching people, you know why I have the web address onethingbetter.email? It's because jasonfeifer.com/newsletter, which is another way that you can access that. I don't want to say that audibly because nobody knows how to spell my last name. Is it with 2 F's like Michelle? Is it, you don't know. So I had to go out and register.
What's going on here? Yeah.
Right, exactly. So I had to come out with a new domain name so that people could hear it. That's like how you have to think of things. Anyway, yes, really, really appreciate this. There's so much change happening. You are not alone in doing that. I'll share just one other name droppy thing as we wrap here, which is that Malcolm Gladwell, best-selling author, and so
Blink.
on, said this line to me that, think, blink, or blink, a bunch of others, said, anyway, he said this thing to me, which I really loved. He said, self-conceptions are powerfully limiting. That if too narrow a definition of yourself, then you will turn down all these other opportunities around you that could be the next great opportunity. So don't narrow your definition of yourself. Self-conceptions are powerfully limiting. I think about that all the time.
Malcolm Gladwell once said to me, well, Sheri, this was surprisingly delightful. I didn't expect much from a radio interview. So Jason, in my other life, I'm an MSW. I'm a social worker, and I believe in people, and I believe in empowerment, and I believe that within each of us, we have the tools and the seeds we need to thrive. It's just sometimes life beats us down and rains on us hard, and you might just need someone to come along with a little gentle nudge and say, hey, have you looked under there? Because I think there might be something under there. I think people are awesome, and I think people are capable, and I think people deserve to live in joy and, to quote you, autonomy and relatedness and competency. I think that is what people deserve. And if you're listening right now and you're in the mess, you deserve it too. Jason Feifer, we will chat again. We will most definitely chat again. Y'all go visit Jason at onethingbetter.email. And if you are already reading Entrepreneur Magazine or on the website, entrepreneur.com, well, you just met the man that's putting it together for you. So there you go. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Oddcast. Our website is BOBANDSHERI.com. We sure appreciate you hanging out because, as you know, you're the people we're making it for. And if you weren't here, we would be talking to ourselves, and that would be unsettling. We'll see you on the next Oddcast.